This week's episode is sponsored by Panasonic.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
And our audio engineer, Mike Weinstein, will no doubt be jumping in with a question or two along the way. Cowboy lore has deep roots as an archetype of American culture, but I bet you didn't know that the word cowboy got its start as a pejorative term for African-American ranch hands who worked as cattle wranglers across the antebellum South. If you didn't know this little factoid, it's okay because we didn't know that either until now. From the urban stables of northern Philadelphia to the legendary Roy LeBlanc Rodeo in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, black cowboys lived pretty much under the radar until recently when songs by pop culture icons Lil Nas X and Beyoncé went viral and catapulted the black Western aesthetic into the limelight. In today's show, we're getting the inside scoop from two photographers who've been fully immersed in these vibrant communities since long before they became a pop fashion trend. Who are these people? Here's a little background about them. Ron Tarver was born and raised in Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, and is now based outside Philadelphia. During 32 years as a staffer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, he was nominated not for one, not two, but three Pulitzers and shared the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in addition to many other accolades. Tarver's photographs have been exhibited internationally. His photographs can be found in private, corporate, and museum collections and have appeared in major publications both in print and online. In 2004, he co-authored the book We Were There, Voices of African American Veterans, published by HarperCollins, accompanied by a traveling exhibition. A recipient of the 2021 Guggenheim Fellowship and a 2001 Pew Fellowship in the Arts, Tarver has also received funding from the NEA, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and an Independence Foundation Fellowship. He currently serves as Associate Professor of Art at Swarthmore College. His book, The Long Ride Home, Black Cowboys in America, was released by George F. Thompson Publishers in September. Ivan McClellan is a photojournalist and designer originally from Kansas City, Missouri. These days, he calls Portland, Oregon home. His work reveals marginalized aspects of black culture, challenging broad assumptions and myths about racial identity in America. His project 8 Seconds focuses on elevating narratives about American black cowboys and transforming the culture of the American West by recentering black women and men back as an integral part of a historical narrative. After initially self-publishing his photos in a book form, 8 Seconds was released by Damiani Books in April. The winner of the 2022 Getty Inclusion Grant, McClellan's photos have been presented in and collected by museums and cultural spaces across the United States. His work has also been featured in ESPN, The Undefeated, and Fast Company. As an experienced designer for Adobe Lightroom, he has led projects for Nike, Adidas, Disney, and the U.S. national soccer team. And most recently, he founded the 8 Seconds Rodeo in 2023. Now, without further ado, let's saddle up and get along, little doggies. Ron Tarver and Ivan McClellan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Now, before we go any further, we got to clear something up here. Before we set the bull loose, can either of you please explain to us what little doggies are? Because I keep getting mental images of little cocktail franks, tiny egg rolls, and potato knishes with dipping sauce.
I don't know, Ivan. Yeah, I have no idea what a little doggy is. I've never heard anybody say that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I watched 50s TV. They all said it. Anyway, on a more serious subject, you guys grew up right smack dab in the middle of middle America. Ron, you're in Easton, Oklahoma during the 1960s, and Ivan in Kansas City during the mid-80s and 90s. Age-wise, you're a generation apart, and your hometowns are about 250 miles apart as the crow flies. What are your memories of your respective hometowns? Do either of you recall any references to cowboy culture from your childhoods?
You want to take that, Ivan? Yeah, Kansas City is a cow town, and they got a big rodeo and barbecue festival called the American Royal. It's a stock show. You would go down there. There'd be a barbecue competition. You could sample who's got the best barbecue, which is street cred in Kansas City. If you ask what's the best barbecue in Kansas City, my mom's house is the standard answer. And, the American Royal Rodeo, we would go there every year. I remember a couple of years my choir sang the national anthem there. I remember the smell more than anything distinctly. It was a terrible manure smell when you walked in there. And I just remember it being a very white space, and we would sing the national anthem and leave.
I was going to ask you about that. What was the black presence? Because obviously, I mean, what we hear about today is that historically there's a huge black presence when it comes to cowboys and this whole genre and culture of life. But you didn't really even see that in your hometown.
No, I didn't see it. The American Royal was founded by a black man, actually, but I remember it being a large majority of white folks there and just not anything that I was particularly interested in. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, we lived on 5 acres of land. Every house on our block had large amounts of acreage behind it that everybody had bought up so they wouldn't build public housing behind our houses. And there were folks back there that had chickens. There was a man back there named Mr. Wills who had cows. He was a black man. But I just never associated those folks as cowboys. And I think a lot of it was because of what I had seen on TV. I didn't see many black folks on Bonanza or Gunsmoke reruns that I would watch. One of my favorite movies was Tombstone with Val Kilmer about Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. And there's not a single black person in that entire movie. So even though there were folks that worked the land and worked with animals, I just never associated them with cowboy culture.
Pop culture, you would not know it. I mean, I'm thinking back too. I mean, I grew up watching 50s and 60s and 70s, 80s TV, and I watched all the Westerns as a kid, and there were no black folk there at all, non-existent. I mean, there weren't any, period, none.
Yeah, there are some examples of it. I think Sidney Poitier was in a Western, and
that's already coming along already, though. But if on standard TV fare, if you tuned in, to channels, ABC, CBS, or NBC, which were the choices back in the day, no.
Yeah. Well, I will say that back in the 70s or 60s, they used to film a black Western in Philadelphia in Fairmount Park. And I still have yet to track that down, but I have some friends that witnessed that. There was a show called Sally Star that was an after-school kids program. I think it was associated with that. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think it may have had something to do with that. But that happened in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia did a lot of original TV production. I have a friend who grew up there back in the 40s and 50s when he was there. He'd be in his 80s now if he was still around. And he'd tell me that you turn on TV and Philadelphia had Westerns that were filmed in Bucks County. And every once in a while, depending what was going on, there was a little airfield there, and every once you'd see an airplane fly by, even though it was a Western. But yeah, he says there was a lot of original programming right outside of Philadelphia. So it's interesting that you're bringing that into the picture also.
Yeah. I would just like to fill a little bit about my background growing up.
Please.
So I grew up in a really small little town. When I was there, it was about 900 people, very agricultural community. And I remember cows being herded through our yard when they would herd cattle from one end of the town to the other. And every once in a while, a calf would get used on our property and I'd have to shoo it out. There was a rodeo arena right up the street from our house. That was kind of the hangout in the summer. You'd go up there and go to the rodeo. There was an actual fort that was built as a replica from a fort in the early 1800s where we would play cowboys and Indians. Every once in a while, we'd play with BB guns and actually bow and arrows. If you got shot with a BB gun, you'd have to bail off the horse, just like the Westerns. So, I definitely grew up in that culture, and I had relatives that had a 60-acre farm right outside of town where we'd go out and play and swim in the cow pond, do those kind of things. But, it's something that I really didn't think of as being anything special. It was just the way it was,
Interesting. So, Ron, you left Oklahoma and moved to Philadelphia and started working for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And you did your first story on Black Cowboys, documenting a local group in northern Philadelphia. And the story was so successful, you were able to convince your editors to let you travel across country and dig deeper in on the subject. What did you know about Black cowboys in the other regions of the country when you first set out
I was a journalist, so you just sort of do the whole gumshoe tracking down leads and following leads. And everybody knows somebody, at least in cowboy culture. It kind of started with the guys in Philly and New York who knew people out west. There was a man who had a traveling rodeo circuit, Thurl Ladding. It was probably the only Black traveling rodeo. I mean, you have the Bill Pickett rodeo, but he literally took the whole rodeo with him, the gates and everything. He was just outside of Chicago. And so somebody told me about him. I went out and spent some time with him. And then he told me about somebody in Oklahoma. I went down there, and then Texas, and then Oakland. So one thing led to another. And luckily, the paper had the funds at that time to let me do that amount of traveling. And it was great. It just worked out.
Yeah, that's amazing. How much time would you spend in each area?
It depended on what it was. So with Thurl, I was probably with them for maybe a week. I found this other woman named Betsy Bramwell. I spent maybe 3 or 4 days with her. She was just outside of Stillwater, Oklahoma. Betsy was just amazing. I mean, she was the true horse whisperer. I mean, she could tell a horse to stand up and do a pirouette. She was just amazing with horses. Unfortunately, she's passed away, but her family's still out there. But, it was just that kind of thing. You just find out one thing and go to the next place and shoot that. And then that story ran in the Inquirer as a 5-part series during Black History Month, and then National Geographic contacted me and said they wanted me to work on a story for them. So I spent another 6 months or so doing even more traveling. So I was able to fill out some of the stories that I had started with the paper and then find new ones.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What kind of differences were there between the cowboys and the communities, ranging from the urban north to the rural south and west?
I think it's pretty obvious the folks who were doing it in the city, I mean, you didn't have the big open spaces that you would have out in Texas and Oklahoma, but I think everybody still had the sense of a Western culture. A lot of the folks in Philadelphia had roots in the South and Georgia and Florida, so they knew what they were doing. I mean, it's not like they just found a horse in place and decided to ride it. They knew how to take care of horses. They knew how to ride horses and things like that. The folks out west, I found them to be a little bit more laid back in terms of how they saw themselves. I have a big family reunion that happens down in Texas every year, and like 400 of my relatives show up, which is kind of a scary thing. But I remember one time we were at a pavilion, I got to say something, and I looked across the crowd, and they all looked like me. And I thought, wow, that's spooky. But most of them are ranchers. Most of them are cattle people. But to ask them if they are cowboys and cow people, I'm not so sure they identify themselves in sort of the Hollywood manner, but they are definitely ranchers and they live that lifestyle. In my experience, the idea of the Black cowboy doesn't exist in our imaginations as the white cowboy on the high plains, in Wyoming and places like that, and sort of that mythologized version of the cowboy.
Right.
Black cowboys didn't have those 10,000-acre ranches to deal with. I mean, they were doing the hard work of bringing the cattle up from the South on railroad cars and doing all the hard work of maintaining ranches and things like that. It wasn't easy, beautiful work the way that we mythologize the cowboy. It was ugly, dirty, hard work.
Well, if you think about it, even if you watch, TV shows or movies having to do with the Old West, everybody's wearing these really nice, crisp outfits with spangles and all kinds of. No one dressed that. You ever look at pictures of people back then? Dry cleaning didn't exist. And it was basically you dressed in what you can afford, what you could find. You were wearing the burlap from the potatoes if you had to. And very few people were dandies. But if you look at this stuff, everybody was a dandy back then and crisp and clean. They weren't.
Well, I mean, I think now, too, you can go to a dude ranch and you have the guys that have really sharp leather chaps and big white hats, and they'll take you on a trail ride and things like that. And I mean, I've done projects on those kind of dude ranches. And I think that's where people outside of Hollywood get the idea of this cowboy life. They'll take them into the barn and let them muck a stall, maybe. They'll scoop up a piece of hay and throw it in the stall. I can tell you firsthand, that is not mucking stall. Mucking a stall is not pleasant.
Well, that's like saying I'm going camping, but you're in a mobile home. It's the same thing. It's not the same deal at all.
Right. Always tell people that the reason I moved to Philadelphia is because I didn't have to wake up and have something looking at me that wanted to be fed.
I love it. So, right, another question. The photos in your book, The Long Ride Home, they're all from the early 90s, which means you were cranking film back then. This is pre-digital. What kind of gear were you using back then, and what film stocks did you load into your camera? What were you shooting?
Yeah, well, everybody wants to know what kind of camera I use, and I always used a Nikon. So, I mean, what era of Nikon was that? Maybe F3, something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was shooting back then. Those are the best workhorses. Those are amazing cameras.
I've been really fortunate to not really have to buy cameras. I mean, they're always supplied by all the places I worked, or maybe I got a grant or two, but I never really thought about the camera as, oh, this is the hottest new thing. I mean, it was like a paintbrush to me. It's like, I need a double dot paintbrush to make this kind of photo, or I need that. That's the way I looked at things in terms of lenses and things like that. I'm not an equipment junkie,
These are the tools that you use to do what you got to do, just like a mechanic, okay? You go to a mechanic, you want to make sure that they have the tools they need to fix what you need fixed on your car. It's the tool, and it's the work at the end of the day that makes a difference.
I mean, I do a lot of talks at camera clubs and things like that, and people say, what kind of camera do you use? I guess I have no idea. It could have been my cell phone. I don't know. It's like, you like the picture. That's all I care about. But in terms of film stock, it was all Kodachrome 200 for geographic.
Oh,
yeah. I still have some film left over from that. I still have some bricks of Kodachrome 200 left.
And they're going to remain as just sealed bricks. Yeah, 200 was a godsend for a lot of people back then who wanted to get good color quality and needed speed. It's really fun. We have to laugh, but I mean, back then 200 was a big deal, and 1600 was astronomical, and you could actually see the grain just looking at it with your naked eye. And now, what we're shooting, what, millions?
Yeah,
it's insane.
All those pictures in my book were all scanned from. Well, actually, they weren't scanned. What I did was I got a Nikon Z, whatever it is, the latest Nikon. And that's what I used to
digitize
the images with.
That's what I do. And Nikon makes that really neat little attachment. They make it so easy to do that. And a lot of people have to understand that if you do have old slides, that is the best way of doing it. I do the same thing with a Sony system and a bellows and a macro and a little light thing. And I'm just photographing my old Kodachromes. And if you have a sensor of, above 24 megapixel, you can get some amazing, good digitized images.
Alan or Ron, what's the process of using a camera to actually just take a picture instead of scanning it?
It's a slide copy attachment for Nikon cameras, and it's meant to be used with select macro lens. You need a macro lens. It has to focus to 1:1.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at right now. It's a Nikon 60 millimeter.
62.8 macro.
You have to use a different mount because the mount is bigger than the lens, so you have to use an adapter.
Do you have to have the slide above like a light panel?
The best thing is to have a daylight light source, or just something you have some kind of control over.
I have one of these little Lytra lights. I don't think they make them anymore.
Oh, I know what you mean. Right.
But you can control the brightness on them and make them as white hot. So I can get it up to like 5,700 Kelvin. So I get a good, really hot white light and set my f-stop to be around 16 or something so I can get a good crisp image. And when I pumped these things into the computer, they were just gorgeous. And the great thing about that is you can get most of the dust off without scanning on a flatbed. And, you can get them really clean and sharp, and they're just so crisp, and the colors are just amazing. It really captured everything.
If anything, it actually captures more, is my experience, because when working from a transparency, there's a limit to how much you could hold highlights and shadows at the same time. Whereas when you scan, when you digitize them, you could contain your highlights and then open up your shadows and really get a well-balanced image with more tonality than you ever would expect to get from a transparency. One thing I'd like to just recommend, if using a macro lens, it's f2.8, stick to about f8. You want to be about 3 stops down. That's your sharpest aperture. At f16, you're actually going to have a degraded image.
You're right.
All right. But if anybody else is interested in that, if you Google my name or go to the B&H Explorer website, and you put Frankenscanner into the field. I did an article about how I converted my Sony A7R III with an old Nikon bellows system and macro lens with an LED light source that's balanced. And I've been doing great stuff with that. And it's simple. It's not complex and a tiny fraction of the cost of a scanner. On that same topic, aside from a cap of only 36 exposures per roll and limited choices of high ISO film, so you stuck at like 200. Did shooting analog present any technical limitations compared to where you currently work digitally?
Oh, it's completely yeah, shooting analog is a whole other can of worms, and when I say can of worms, I mean you don't have the option to like change your ISO. You're really limited in what you can do with it, and you really have to think about your light. I remember when I was with Geographic, my editor Susan Welshman, what I'd do is I'd shoot her for a couple of weeks and then I would send my film in, and then I'd go back to DC and we'd sit in the editing room and go through all the stuff. And a lot of stuff, you're shooting blind.
Right.
You don't know what you're shooting.
Right.
You knit it in. So you're bracketing a lot if you can. And I was shooting some really ugly light. And I remember she said, well, go down and talk to Bill Allard. I don't know if you remember Bill Allard. It's one of the legendary National Geographic photographers. He said, go down and talk to Bill and ask him. He's really good about shooting in, ugly light. I was so intimidated. I remember I walked into his office, knocked on the door and said, Mr. Allard, Susan asked me to come down and can you give me some pointers on shooting in bad light? He goes, yeah, you just got to find the good light and the bad light. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Kind of slucked out of there, and I was like, okay. But he's right. There is good light everywhere. You just have to find it and you have to be ready for it and look for it. And sometimes you have to wait for something to happen in it. And he was amazingly right about that,
Mm-hmm. So, Ron, most of the pictures in your book are from that time period in the early to mid 90s. And you called the book down from 20,000 slides. But have you continued documenting Black Cowboys since then?
I was on sabbatical a couple of years ago, and so I took some time, went down to Houston to track down some of the folks that I had photographed. Now, most of these folks are in their 80s now, or they're not with us anymore, and the kids are in their 40s. There's a young man up here that I started photographing when he was 12, I think, and now he's active in training horses for a racetrack, the Parks Casino racetrack in Philly. Spent a lot of time with him, and his daughter actually is involved in horses. I went down to Texas with the intentions to do still photos. And what I ended up doing was doing more video and just talking to some of these guys and doing little short documentaries. So I think what I'm going to do is put out mini docs on Instagram. So that's going to be coming up at some point.
Cool.
I mean, I wanted this story to leave me alone so much. At 30 years, it's just been walking behind me saying, here I am, don't forget me, And with this book, a lot of other opportunities have popped up, collaborations and things. So
nice.
We'll see where all that
That's
goes.
really remarkable. So, Ivan, let's get some backstory on your work. You left Kansas City and pursued a successful career as a graphic designer, ending up in Portland. But you've also worked as a wedding, fashion, and landscape photographer. Can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of your work?
Yeah, I was working in agencies, advertising and marketing agencies as a designer, mostly on digital products. And I would end up working on some email marketing campaign for something I had no interest in. And I was like, man, this really isn't feeding my creative spirit. And so I went on a trip to Turkey, and a friend of mine borrowed me his Canon, just a little Rebel. And I went over there and had this amazing experience of beginner's luck with a camera. I didn't know anything about ISO or white balance or anything, but I ended up taking extraordinary photos. But more than that, I really saw the camera as this tool to interact with folks. I ended up making friends and speaking to people and engaging with people that I never would have had the courage to speak to without the camera on my face. And I came back home and started doing photography as a hobby. Then I got it in my mind that I would do it professionally. And that's how I got into weddings. This was right around the time that Pinterest was really taking off. So brides were like can you get a picture of us jumping in the air and throwing Skittles? Or can you do something that we saw on Pinterest? So it wasn't enjoyable for me. I love weddings and I have massive respect for wedding photography, but I didn't want it to become a space where I was being dictated to, or that it became a place where I couldn't be creative, just like my design job had become. So
Mm.
I stopped doing that and focused on street photography for about 5 years. Every day, I would spend about 3 hours lurking around the streets of Portland, taking pictures of strangers. And it was fulfilling. It was that Istanbul experience of using the camera as a tool to engage with strangers, which I just really, really enjoyed. It was right at the peak of doing that that I had a chance encounter with a filmmaker named Charles Perry. And I asked him what he was working on. He said, I'm working on a documentary. I said, about what? He said, Black Cowboys, which was kind of a funny phrase to me. The first thing that I thought about was Blazing Saddles. And I thought about Cowboy Curtis on Pee Wee's Playhouse. And I was just like, what is this? Black Cowboy. And like I said, I kind of grown up around the culture, but that phrase specifically just seemed odd to me. And he eventually invited me to a Black rodeo in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, the Roy LeBlanc Invitational. He said, come down there the second weekend in August and you'll see something that'll blow your mind. And so I went down there. I borrowed my mom's car in Kansas City, drove it down to Okmulgee, which is about 3.5 hours away. You know, it was a 105-degree day, 100% humidity. There were grasshoppers jumping on my clothes. I was wearing wingtips and chinos and a linen shirt, and there were chiggers biting my ankles. They got real bad chiggers down there. I was just kind of miserable. There was a haze of barbecue smoke over the entire lawn. There were thousands of white horse trailers, horses everywhere, and probably 2,000 Black Cowboys down there. They were everywhere. It was like this Oz-like experience for me. I saw traditional cowboys in starched shirts, you know, so much starch that it crunched when they moved their arms. There were women in bedazzled shirts with long braids and acrylic nails. There were young men riding horses with no shirt on and basketball shorts. And it was just this amazing mixture of Black culture and Western culture in a way that I never knew existed.
Yeah, great picture.
Yeah. Okmulgee is kind of the Super Bowl of rodeos.
It really is. There's nothing like it. A lot of people that I found there came down from Kansas City, Kansas, within a quarter mile of my house where I grew up, and they come down there every year for their family reunions. And so it's got this family reunion vibe. There's smoked turkey legs and there's catfish, and it's a really good family time. There's people doing the Cupid shuffle in their boots. Like, it's a big party on the lawn outside of the rodeo. But then when the lights go down, all of the riders get very serious and the competition gets very intense and the crowd gets ramped up. And there's, as far as culture goes, nothing like it in the rodeo world.
Did you have a camera with you during that first visit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had a camera. I was using it again as a tool to interact with people because I felt really out of place. I don't know why I dressed like an insurance salesman to the rodeo, but I did. And nobody judged me. You know, people were just as curious about me as I was about them. And the camera was this great way to engage with folks. I think that year I was the only photographer that I saw there. Now
Wow.
there's hundreds. I really thought I had stumbled upon something that nobody had ever been to until I found Ron's work about a year later, and it was like, oh man, this is well documented, well covered, and Ron has taken extraordinary photos down there, and it was just this amazing reference point for me and the work that I was doing to come across Ron's work and see that he had done it decades before I had even heard about the thing.
That's so cool. So what was the first year that you documented
The first year I was down there was 2015, and I've been back most years since. And I've been to dozens of other Black rodeos around the country, and it's really this all-consuming thing. Like Ron, I've kind of been like, all right, I'm going to go on and do something else. But it's like, no, I'm not quite done yet, you know, and it really sticks to you. And it's expanding and continuing to grow. And there's nuance and there's details that I've missed. And so I just keep drilling deeper and deeper into this culture and finding more things that are attractive to me about it.
What specific gear are you shooting with these days?
I shoot all digital. Speed is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Shooting, editing, and getting it out of there is really important. I'll usually shoot the rodeo and go home at midnight and edit all the photos that same day just because I don't like stuff sitting around. And I want to see what I got, I'm really curious about it. Most of the photos I shoot on a Fuji X-E1 with a Zeiss 32 millimeter lens. So it's a pretty basic camera.
So it's more or less a normal lens that you're using.
Yeah.
Okay. Normal perspective. Okay. Yeah.
And it fits really well into my hand and I know it really well. And my wife won't let me use a cell phone when I drive, but she will let me use a camera because she feels like it's an extension of my arm. And
No, wait a minute. She won't let you use your phone, but she'll let you take pictures while you're driving.
yeah, exactly. Because she's
Okay, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to touch that. But you know what? Good for you. You can get away with something. 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Exactly.
So you find a normal lens to be the best focal length for your work, the way you shoot. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I get pretty close. It's pretty weird to shoot with that lens when you're shooting bull riding or there's horses running by you. You got to get close, you got to get in there. That's one of the things too that I like about Okmulgee is you don't have to have a press pass and nobody's going to kick you out the arena. If you want to be in the dirt, you go on in there. It's your own life and it's your own fault. So I usually get pretty close and that's where I like it. I feel like you can feel the energy better when you're right on top of what it is that you're shooting.
Yeah, and some of your pictures are real close-ups. It's not just that you're close to the action, but you're also getting close-up details of things, which are really fascinating.
Yeah, I like to look at hands. I like to look at textures. I really like to drill into the specificity of what it is that I'm shooting. And I just find that 32 millimeter lens works great. It's probably more like a 50 because it's a crop sensor on that XE1. I also shoot on a Fuji GFX 102 medium format system with a 40 to 100 millimeter zoom lens.
So a little wider and a little longer than normal. Okay. A little more elbow room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I shoot on that one as well, but the XE1 with the 32 millimeter is my go-to. That's what I shot street photography in, and I feel like I got my 10,000 hours. I feel like I got my reps in on that camera, and it's really comfortable in my hand.
And what ISO range are you working in? How high are you boosting the speed to get those action shots?
I won't go above like 1200 typically, because after that, it just turns into soup, and I can't really do anything with the amount of grain in the photo, but I can get up to 1200 and it usually looks acceptably good. When it gets very dark, I'll kind of just give up and say, it's a good day. There's nowhere in the world that I like to shoot more than at the Roy LeBlanc Invitational between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. in August. It's just the best light. There's so much action, so much activity, so much movement. People are getting ready for the grand entry into the arena. The athletes are in their regalia. And I just feast on that 2 hours of beautiful Oklahoma light. But then when the sun goes down, I take less and less photos as it gets darker and darker.
Ivan, one thing you note as a big difference within Black rodeos is that women have a major presence, both in competitions and in running the show. Does the vibe at events shift at all when women athletes are performing?
Yeah, and I think Ron can speak to this as well. The power of female athletes is something that really shocked me going into this rodeo space. They are incredibly athletic and the bonds that they have with their horse are unparalleled. But beyond that, the Black rodeo space, the women are the boss, like in the Bill Pickett rodeo, Valeria Cunningham runs the show and most of her team are women. So they're not only like dominating as athletes, but they also are cutting the checks. So just the respect and the regard that the cowboy community has for women and the balance that there is in this space, I think is something that I really, really enjoy.
Do you find there's much of a difference in photographing the Black women athletes and men?
Not particularly. I think I was a little bit shy initially to walk up and photograph anybody. But I think the first year that I went, the thing that stood out to me was the bond between fathers and sons. And that was really what I focused on. I was seeing dads really mentor younger men, and I was seeing little boys in the dirt running around pushing steer, and their dads being like, no, you got to do it this way, or you're in the way, you need to be careful. And I was like, wow, like that's really cool to see. I grew up without a dad, and so just seeing that connection and that interaction felt really special to me. But I got home and I was like, I didn't take like any pictures of women. That was weird because they were there and they were really doing extraordinary stuff. I think part of the reason that I didn't was because barrel racing is darn near impossible to get a picture of. It's a woman going 40 miles per hour straight across the arena, and I had no clue how to shoot it at the time. Barrel racer named Kenesha Jackson told me how to shoot barrel racing. She said, you got to stand by the second barrel, and that horse goes all the way around. So you have an opportunity to actually catch a picture of the rider running toward you, the rider turning the barrel, and then the rider going away toward barrel 3. So I ended up learning how to shoot that sport and got a lot more comfortable interacting with all of the cowboys and the women as well. And it's really become, I think, a differentiator in my work, just the balance of shooting, everybody that's participating.
So, what exactly is barrel racing? I'm trying to picture what it might be and having a hard time.
So, barrel race is a rider, typically women, but men can ride in barrel racing as well. They're on horseback and they run a cloverleaf pattern around barrels in the arena. And so they run as fast as they can in the arena, and then they turn around one barrel. They run straight to the second barrel, run around that barrel, run to the third barrel at the end of the arena, run around that, and then sprint all the way back to the front of the arena. It's really extraordinary, and it's one of the most exciting rodeo sports.
Sounds really intricate.
It's pretty amazing. And you can't knock the barrel over either. That's the thing.
That has to be terrifying. You stand next to the barrels as they're coming around, because that has to be pretty terrifying if that's where you are.
Yeah, I know. It's all scary. Like, it's yeah.
Now, speaking about scary now, Ivan, you mentioned in an article that your connection to photographing animals has improved over the years. Can you expand on this a bit and perhaps share a tip or two for cozying up to a horse or maybe even an irritable 1,800-pound piece of snarling beef?
Yeah, I was scared of horses. You can't tell what they're thinking, their eyes are black. And if you can see the whites of their eyes, that's a problem because they're scared of you. So I was like, I can't really gauge what's going on with this animal. And they're enormous. And I used to be very afraid and wouldn't get close to the horse. And
they know that, right?
And then they can tell that I'm afraid, because
Sure.
I've got this sense that I don't have. And so I just felt like the horses had my number and they had a leg up on me. And if the horse didn't like me, then the owner wouldn't like me. And I was just very, very nervous. A horse stepped on my foot. We got pinned up against a wall and a horse stepped on my foot and broke my foot.
Ooh.
And after that, I just wasn't so afraid. I was like, well, the worst thing that can happen happened. And then I just got more comfortable after that.
Did that horse gaze down at you after that happened and sort of give a little...
It did. It laughed. It mocked me.
On a more serious note, though, I'm a cat person, and I love watching my cat, the way they react to things in the environment. And there are very little subtle things, little twitches that an ear will move a certain way. Are there ways that you read the horse that have to be so many tiny little signs that enable you to read where their heads are at any given point in time?
Yeah, I think, the owner is going to be more dialed into the horse than me, but the ears are an indicator. If the ears are pinned back, that's probably not a good sign. Like I said, the whites in the eyes is an indicator. If a horse is getting frustrated, it'll sigh. It'll huff out of its nose. And so that's another good indication as well. They'll let you know if you're paying attention that you're making them frustrated. And I've gotten to realize which horses are open to having their picture taken and which ones aren't. Horses will actually pose, they'll put a leg up. They'll show their good side. They'll really ham it up sometimes if they know that you're paying attention to them, and finding the right horse that's into that is something that I'm getting better at.
Nice. Ron, you mentioned that early on you met this woman in Oklahoma, I believe, who you referred to as a horse whisperer. What kind of things did you learn from her about animal behavior and ways to photograph horses?
Yeah, I mean, Betsy was really amazing. One of the things that I wanted to do when I was photographing, because, I was really photographing more in a narrative structure, documentary structure when I was doing those things. So I was trying to tell a story with each person. But I wanted to find somebody who would sort of serve that, Annie Oakley type female person that would represent the female side of the cowboy culture. And the same way with, finding somebody who really truly lived the lifestyle of a black cowboy without just wearing the clothes and that kind of thing, but really lived that lifestyle. So I found Betsy out in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I had never really seen anybody that was as good with horses as Betsy. I mean, she was just unreal. I remember one time somebody brought a horse up that wasn't broken, hadn't been trained, or it was just a really nasty, snarly horse. I remember when they pulled it up, it was kicking the side of the trailer, and, Betsy put a rope ring on it and pulled it up to a fence post and punched it, which was kind of amazing. And the horse was like, what is this woman doing? And she literally put one foot in the stirrup and rode this horse around the yard. It wasn't in an arena or anything. Literally, it's just out in this field in front of the stables. And I'm running around out there with a 24 millimeter lens on trying to get this. I made one picture where, and by the end of the day, literally, she's riding this horse and she's patting it on the head. And I have a photograph of her patting this horse on the head. That's the power this woman had. I mean, she was amazing. One of the other things, she had this fantasy about being a pro golfer. So every morning she would get up and whack some golf balls out in the prairie. It was kind of wild. But she lived a hard life. She was a smoker and a drinker, and she lived in a trailer. And she did the cowboy thing, She was amazing. I also spent some time with some women out in Oakland. It was a riding group. I wanted to show the contrast between their cow person lives and what they did for a living. So I spent some time with this woman who was a courtroom stenographer. I actually got a shot of her in the courtroom taking notes, and then a shot of her barrel racing, which was completely different. I mean, she turned into a monster on the horse. She was riding this beast around the barrels, like Ivan was saying, and going 40 miles an hour straight with no reckless abandon, but controlled abandon. So I was lucky enough to have that experience. I may be sort of projecting a little bit, but I think women have a subtlety that the men don't have, where men might get on a horse and they're just going to try and do this thing through brute strength. One of the photographs that I made at Okmulgee was this rodeo queen. It was during the grand entry. And like Ivan said, the light was just beautiful, and she turned right into it. And the poise that she possessed on the horse, I think, really encapsulates how women ride horses, how they control themselves on horses. It was just, I love that photograph.
And I'm sure the horse can feel that difference.
Oh, yeah. Horses know everything. It's like Ivan said, I mean, you really have to keep an eye on their ears. If you have a horse where its ears are pinned back and you're showing the whites of eyes, you are in major trouble. He's not digging your vibe at all. You definitely don't walk behind him. Yeah, there's a lot of little things you have to do to know what the horse is doing and how it's feeling at the time. But the horses are also really playful too. They'll bite at you. Jordan, my friend, the little boy, now he's the man who trains horses. We were doing an interview the other day, and this horse was just nipping at him the whole time, just nipping at his shoulder. And so Jordan just grabbed his rein and blew in his nose, and the horse was like, oh, okay. That was it. I was like, how'd you do that?
My wife does that to me. It works all the time. She just keeps me in my place. I calm down, and I just stay seated in the corner for the rest of the evening.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying.
Okay, we are going to take a short break so we could drop more quarters in the meter downstairs, and we come back more with Ron Tarver and Ivan McClellan. Stay tuned.
Are you still looking for a great deal this holiday season? The Lumix S5 II mirrorless full-frame camera delivers hybrid photo and video features at an impressive value. Its fast, accurate phase hybrid autofocus with active image stabilization ensures sharp shots in both photo and video. The high-resolution shot mode and live view composite features make it easy to capture stunning images in low-light conditions, while flexible framing supports multiple aspect ratios for social media content. Real-time LUTs enable in-camera color grading for both photo and video, saving time in post-production. Plus, you get unlimited video recording. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about the Lumix S5 II or use the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back with Ron Tarver and Ivan McClellan and Black Cowboys, a fun subject and one that most of us probably have never even thought about, but it's a real deal. Now, gentlemen, let's get back into your books, which both came out this year within 4 months of each other. Now, Ron, you had first tried to publish a book of this work in the 1990s, but nobody was interested. In fact, some editors thought you were yanking them and even questioned the existence of Black Cowboys back then. How did your book come to be published now? What's changed?
Well, I mean, for me, what changed was I got a grant to Guggenheim and I was able to self-publish it. That's one thing that
That's
changed.
credibility. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get anybody to publish it. I mean, I had one editor, a young woman, said there's no such thing as Black Cowboys. And I'm like, for one thing, you have the slides, and then I had like 20,000 slides that says there are Black Cowboys. What do you say to that? Basically, they're just telling me that they don't think there's an audience. So I just put it on the shelf and just said, forget it. I was just frustrated.
You had to do that reluctantly. I'm sorry. You had a lot invested into this, both emotionally, physically, mentally, financially. It couldn't be easy if you just stick it on a shelf like that and go, oh, okay, maybe it's not the right idea. I'm sure that had to burn you a bit.
Actually, I did. Yeah, I think in just the whole photo world, you get used to being told no. But when you get used to being told no in such a humiliating way, to say that this lifestyle is not important, we have to be honest. I mean, most of the acquisition editors in the big publishing houses are white. Now, that's changed somewhat because some of the publishing companies have opened up Black imprints, but back then there was no such thing. So I just put them all in a big Tupperware container and put them in my storage unit and said, so long. Mm. And then the Studio Museum did a show on Black Cowboys, and I got asked by Amanda Hunt, who was one of the curators up there, to look at my work. And so I put together some pictures for them, and that show came out. And then Lil Nas X came out with his song, and sort of the whole cowboy culture idea sort of catch fire.
Time had to catch up to you, essentially.
Yeah, it's like, if I had published that book when I really wanted to back in the 90s, it would have not been this book, and it would have been forgotten, And I think they have that marinating time to sort of really think about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to say in a book. Again, I go back to Bill Allard, and he did a book called Vanishing Breed years ago. And I've always loved that book. It's not in any sort of narrative structure. It's photographs that he had taken over the years. And I thought, if I ever did a book, that's the book that I would want to do with my book. And COVID hit, so we were all kind of sitting in our studios thinking, well, what can we do? So I thought, well, I'll go back through and start editing this stuff to see what I can pull out. And I asked Elizabeth Chris Chang, who had just retired from Geographic, who was a wonderful editor. We literally just went through everything online. In fact, we hadn't met each other until last year. I mean, we worked on this thing for a couple of years and never really personally met. We did everything online. She helped me whittle through the few thousand slides, and we got it down to about 500, I think. And then from there, we came out with the body of the book. But it was a challenge. When you're looking at images that you've stared at for so long, you become kind of visually numb to them. Like, I didn't know what a good picture was after looking at them for so long.
I think another thing that happens is that, at least for the photographer, and this is why I think it helps to have an editor, we get wrapped up in the backstory that went into that picture. And quite often there's an incredible story, and you say, wow, after all that, you actually got that picture. The picture itself is not impressive, but the story is great. But if you don't know that backstory, the picture's dull, but in your head, it's still good. So that's where an editor is good to say, no, 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 it's okay. Great
Yeah.
story, but it doesn't belong here.
I mean, my students all the time come to me. They'll have this complete story about how the picture was made. And I'm like, but it's not a good picture. No, you may have a wonderful story about the picture, but if it's not in front of me on paper, I can't see the backstory,
Right.
you know?
When you do self-editing, that's the trap of it. You have to divorce yourself. You really do.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the picture that's on the cover of my book, I didn't want that to be the cover image because I had just looked at it for too long. And to me, it didn't really work. But then I started looking at all the other images that I made, and I thought, well, none of them work. So where do we go? Luckily, I had just an amazing designer, David Skulkin, and he had taken around to some folks and gotten their opinions, and everybody said that's the cover photo. And I'm so glad that that photo is on the book now because I've gotten so many compliments on Instagram and different places that that's the photo. But I just couldn't see it. And actually, I don't even remember making that image. Like I said, I was shooting film and sending stuff off. So I would just shoot it and then put it in an envelope and send it back to DC. And I didn't see that image until maybe 2 weeks after I'd made it. And everybody loved it then. But it's just like one of those things where I just couldn't see the image. But I'm really glad that everybody talked me into it because it works.
Now, Ivan, you initially self-published a book of your work under the title 8 Seconds. Did you shop this around to publishers and get a book deal from there? And also, were there any major differences between your self-published version and the edition that was released by Damiani?
Yeah, I, similar to Ron, went to everybody and tried to get a book going.
Did you run into the same walls and excuses?
I mean, most of it was just no response at all. But when I did get a response, it was, your name isn't big enough and the subject matter isn't broad enough to make a book, were the things. It was like, you either have to be a name of note or this has to be like a coffee table book. Like, this isn't Cats of Instagram or anything like that.
But 2 negatives make a positive. Couldn't you swing it that way? Come on.
Yeah, I don't have either one of these things going on.
2 negatives? Yeah, okay, if it works. I tell you, it's true. If you're in the creative arts and you're trying to earn a living, you got to be tough to be able to be put down and rejected a lot. But this has to be extra hard because it's more than just a rejection of your work. It's rejection of your culture and who you are too.
Exactly.
Said or unsaid, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough because I knew that it would go and I knew that it would be successful, but it was just very difficult to convince anyone else of that. So I did a Kickstarter, wanted to raise $16,000. We ended up raising $26,000 for the book, and I did everything. I designed it and edited it and picked the binding and the paper and everything for this book. At some point, I had it in design, and I called a photographer friend of mine that worked at Wyatt and Kennedy, and he went through it and he was like, "This is like 280 pages. What are you doing?" And I was like,
Whoa.
I've got a lot of photos, I got to get everything in the book. He's like, this doesn't have to be your only book. He's like, you can release another one. And so I pared it back and made it really concise, but I did edit and design it and pushed it out. I made 600 copies, sold all of those, most of them on the Kickstarter, and was done with it. But I wanted more of it out in the world because it's just a story that I really believe in, and it's work that I really believe in. And so I started looping back around to the same publishers and saying like, hey, I self-published a book and sold out of it. I raised $26,000. Like, let's do this thing. Let's really get it out there more broadly. Still no response, no reaction, negative reaction from folks. So I decided to hire my own editor and my own designer. I worked with a good friend of mine, Miss Rosen, who used to work at Powerhouse and has her own imprint now and is an extraordinary editor, an extraordinary person. And she recommended a designer out of St. Louis named Workplay, and they designed the book. And I had a complete book. I had the forward, I had a designer, it was edited, it was ready to go. And we started shopping it around to folks. We got 2 rejections. And then Miss Rosen sent it to Damiani, and they quickly said yes. And they were like, absolutely. And we made 2,500 copies and it went really well. Tons of press, sold a lot of the books. It sold out at the distributor. But yeah, it was a
Nice.
big journey, multi-year journey, and a lot of persistence and being really, really good at rejection to get this thing out into the world.
So how does that first copy that you self-published differ from the second time around when you hired the designer and were working with Sarah Rosen?
When Miss Rosen started working with me, she asked me for a copy of the book that I had self-published, and I sent it to her. And she was like, "This book is beautiful, but it looks like a wedding album, Ivan." She was like, "It's so formal. It's got all the stuff. It's gold embossed." And it's just like,
You said that you like wedding photographers.
It comes with an 8x10 on decoupage walnut. Yes. It's a
it was very uniform. There was just like no pacing to the book. There was just no nuance to it. Every photo had the same bleed, and it was all of the best photos. It was the absolute best photos, but there was no sense of environment. And she lives in New York City, and she was like, "You've got like pictures of fields or buildings that are deteriorating. You've got all of this environment. I want to go there, just like a field of weeds looks exciting to me being in the big concrete city." And she created a lot more pacing to the book. The theme is a day in the rodeo, and it builds. It starts out very pastoral. It starts out with images of horses and fields and buildings and people starting their day, and then it accelerates throughout that day. You go to the parades and you see people preparing to rodeo, and then it explodes into action and you see people actually doing the rodeo sports, and it sort of goes from day to night. There's just a lot of storytelling in the book visually that wasn't in the one that I self-published.
That's another great lessons there.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody's listening to this who's entertaining the idea of doing a book, that's what you get from working with other people. All right. And again, as long as you trust the other people that you're working with and you respect their ideas. Have you guys ever met before? Just curious.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And is it safe to assume you've had an opportunity to discuss your respective books with one another? And if so, what thoughts do you have about each other's projects? You have 8 seconds. Go.
I think Ron's book is incredible. I'm jealous of Ron's book. I love the paper. It's really well printed and just the breadth of the work. I really respect how intimate and personal he gets with the work. There's a lot of work at people's ranches and inside of people's houses, which is difficult to do in documentary. People will let you shoot them outside, but to get into their world is another challenge. And like I said, that he did it so much earlier than me. And I know that there were challenges and obstacles in getting it out. I just have the most respect for this book. It's got a special place on my shelf.
Well, thank you, Ivan. That's really special. It really means a lot to me. I mean, I'm looking at your book right now. I think we definitely have different styles in terms of how we approach our photography, but I think Ivan's pictures are very intimate as well. You use it with that 50 millimeter perspective. You can really tell that you're really drawn into the image, but the way you kind of pull in and out with the lens too, and it really works well. And I still don't know how you were in the arena getting some of these action shots with that lens. It really puts you down into the arena. That's something, I can't remember if I was in the arena or not, but I was mainly using probably 200 millimeter in that range, something like that, to get my shots. But your shots are very up close and personal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The cover is me in the arena shooting with that camera, and man, that was dumb. It's why the photo is blurry. I missed the focus completely, but you can feel the energy of it, and I hope people can feel the terror of these two giant horses running by me. I think right after they went by, a giant clump of dirt hit the camera and the lens, and it's not something that I would recommend doing. But, it makes for good photos sometimes.
Yeah.
I remember I had to shoot the International Finals rodeo in Oklahoma City one time. This is truly the Super Bowl of rodeos. I was shooting for the small paper in Oklahoma then, and I I go up there and I was wearing my cowboy boots and I looked at all the other photographers around and they all had football cleats on. And I'm thinking, oh no, you know? And I remember being down in the arena and there was a bull coming at me. And, you see those cartoons where people are running and their feet just spinning around in circles. That was me with cowboy boots. And I remember I went out and I got a pair of football cleats. That was my lesson. Yeah.
Proper tool for the job. Okay. What about model releases and image permissions? Did you guys go through any of that stuff? Did you ask for releases? Did you get any? What's the story with that?
So shooting for newspapers, you don't need that. It's implied consent. If your picture is in the paper, that's kind of the general rule of thumb. So I didn't get a lot of permissions for that. Although when I started shooting recently, I made a model release just to go back and get some of the folks that I'd photographed. So I do have some, but not a lot. I always tell my students, if you can, to get model releases for people. Just because
it's better to be on the safe side.
It doesn't stop you from being sued, but at least you have some.
Oh, no. In fact, I know of stories that were like rock solid and they got shot down. No, it's really now. What is the exact story with books? I mean, how does that fall in legally? Are you required to have a model release for a book of this nature? It's not editorial. You are putting together a product and selling it as a product.
Well, I don't know about you, Ivan, but for me, I went through a publisher, George Thompson Publishing, who's a wonderful publisher. He does really nice books. In my contract, I'm responsible for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. You own it all.
Yeah, the photographer has to take responsibility if any issues come up.
George is indemnified from the project, so he's not responsible for any lawsuits. If somebody came to me, and which I have thought of, somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, you're going to take my picture and run off and make all this money with it." It's like, if that were the case,
Yes, money from photography. Yes, that's a good topic for a show.
Yeah, let's go there. If I took all the years I've spent on this project and tried to monetize it, I'm probably making around a nano cent over the years. So I'm not making any money on this book, nor was that the goal. Although I will say that the book sold out in a month.
Wow, congratulations.
That's a lot. That says a lot.
Yeah,
it does.
Which means I'm making about $7 a book, right? So I've printed 1,200 books. So we're right now negotiating to make another thing. And I would like to make some money on this book, for both of our books. I think if anything, what both of our books says to publishers out there, and if any publishers are listening, there is a market for this. People are interested in it. Ivan has 30,000 people on his Instagram. I have roughly about 3,000, but I get 4,000 or 5,000 hits per post. And I can see on Amazon how that reflects in my book. I can put up a post and it'll drive my book up. When my book was released, it was released as the #1 hot new release. It's been up to #1 in individual photography monographs. So this is a subject that people are hungry for. And I have exhibitions scheduled. I have all sorts of book signings scheduled, lectures and talks and things scheduled from here to 2026. And we haven't even put out the exhibition proposals yet.
And you sold out of the books.
And we sold out, which is, I put a little thing out on Instagram, said sold out, and everybody's like congratulating me. And I was like, yeah, it's great, but we don't have any books. So there were 12 on Amazon at one point. So we're frantically trying to get more books out there and trying to figure out where we should go next with this, because it's something I think that people really, really want to see and want to have. And I just know that there's a market out there for it.
And what's your theory about that? Is that the culture of this day and age?
Yeah, I think Beyoncé did both Ivan and me a solid when she released her album. It's like, I want to say thanks, Beyoncé, for doing that, because I got interviewed by USA Today, who has a reporter dedicated to Beyoncé. And when that story hit, my book, it was probably down in the 50s. It went up to number 5 or 6. Once Beehive got in touch with it, it was like, crazy. Look at this culture out there. I mean, Art Burton, who wrote the historical component to my book, did a book on Bass Reeves, and now you have the TV show, Bass Reeves, basically based off of his book. There's definitely a thirst and a hunger out there for the Black Western lifestyle, and it's not going to go away. I don't think this is something that's just a flash in the pan. Look, it's affecting fashion, TV, movies. It's everywhere. Jordan Peele's coming out with a documentary next year, and his production company got in touch with me. We'll have some of the photos in his documentary.
Yeah, it seems to have legs.
Yeah.
At least 4 legs.
4 legs. Yeah.
Now, Ivan, one of the things that's been really important in driving this for you is getting sponsorship for a lot of these rodeo athletes. Your next entrepreneurial step was to get brands to sponsor some of the rodeo athletes that you were working with. And what, if any, hoops did you have to jump through when shifting your focus from photographer creator to a promoter? And which were the first companies to put some skin in the game?
Yeah, it was something that the closer I got, I realized that the biggest barrier between the Black athletes and the white athletes was access to capital.
Mm-hmm.
These Black rodeos have 9 events and a prize purse between $5,000 and $30,000 at the biggest Black rodeos that there are.
That's just for hors d'oeuvres at the white games, right?
I mean, there are some smaller white rodeos, but there are white rodeos or mainstream professional rodeos where the prize pool is in the millions, $200,000 to $1 million. And you don't see a lot of Black athletes that have broken through to perform at that level. And it's not that they're not allowed to, it's that it's expensive.
How much does it cost, say on an annual basis, to participate in this sport? You are a cowboy. You have to have a horse, and you have to have a way of transporting this horse and everything along with it, as well as living and eating on the way. How much do you have to do the minimum just to have your name in the game?
To compete in a rodeo season, from June to October, you've got to have about $100,000 for travel, feed, gas, entry fees, and everything else that you need to pay for. You got to have about $100,000. And you've also, if you're going to be a barrel racer, you've got to have a couple of horses that cost more than $70,000. Same thing for steer wrestlers and calf ropers. You've got to have really good animals. You've got to have a diesel truck and a trailer. It's just remarkably expensive to do this for a living.
So how do the economics work?
So to fund this, if you're going to do it at a high level, you've got to have a sponsor, a brand that is backing you, or you've got to have a rich ranching dad. Those are the sources of funding that the top athletes have to get around the country. There are a couple of Black guys that have done really well bootstrapping their season and getting it done. Charles Sampson won the world championship in bull riding in the early 80s. There was a kid named Ouncy Mitchell who I was friends with, and he was driving around the country, sleeping in his car, going from rodeo to rodeo, riding around as a bull rider. He ended up getting murdered because he stayed with a woman that he got in a fight with. And that really was the catalyst for me to start to get very serious about helping these athletes get sponsorship. So if they were going to take a crack at the world championship, they didn't have to do foolish things or things that they wouldn't otherwise do to get a shower and a meal. So my background is in marketing and advertising. So I've got good relationship with a lot of brands, Western brands in particular. And so I started to reach out to these brands and come up with commercial projects sort of promoting these Black athletes on behalf of the brand. And I would, in those deals, outline payment for the athletes. We would allocate some payment for the athletes. It was just a few grand for them, but it was a way to introduce them to the Wranglers and the Tacomas and the Stetsons and Ariats of the world. And then we would have a more substantive conversation about them giving long-term support to these athletes to get down the road. There are 3 athletes that we've gotten sponsored so far through the 8 Seconds Project, which is extraordinary. And there are about 3 Black calf ropers who do really, really well in the PRCA, but the other disciplines, you don't see a lot of Black athletes in even the top 50 rankings in pro rodeo. And so the hope is that by getting these folks sponsored and now doing our own rodeo, we'll be able to see those numbers change, and we'll be able to see a lot more Black people breaking through to the top ranks of the sport.
Yeah. And can I just add, what Ivan is doing is so critically important to young people who want to, go into rodeo. I mean, if you compare it to NASCAR, you sell those stickers on a NASCAR, and it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And for a young person coming up, that doesn't have the rich daddy or the sponsorship, what Ivan's doing is so critically important to nurture this younger group of people that have the talent. They just don't have the resources. And it's really, really, really important to have that kind of nurturing and that kind of backing, and that, even just the introduction, is super huge. So what he's doing is hyper critical to young people out there, to anybody that wants to go into rodeoing.
Thanks, Ron.
And not only that, you founded your own rodeo in 2023 in Portland. So how has your life changed since launching a rodeo of your own?
I had never planned a birthday party, and all of a sudden I was planning a 2,000 person rodeo.
Don't start small.
No, we don't do small stuff. Small stuff stays small. So I had to ramp up real quick. I had to source dirt, 40 dump trucks of dirt. I had to find bleachers. I had to find stock. I had to find animals, lighting, audio, all of this stuff we loaded into the expo center in Portland. And I had no clue what I was doing, and I had no money, but I just kept going forward. The rodeo was in June, and about March, I still had no money. And we were like marching forward. I had athletes committed. We were selling tickets. And I started to really think about the Fire Festival. If you've heard about the Fire Festival.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I understand how this guy got to that point. He just kept going too long and never backed out. But, I kept going. The money came in. We got our first sponsor, which was a boot company named Tacovas. And then Wrangler came in, and then Monster Energy came in. And we eventually ended up raising the money that we needed to host the rodeo. Our payout across 5 events was $60,000. So a lot of athletes came to get their crack at $12,000 per event that we were showing. My kids competed in the mutton busting competition. They rode sheep around the arena. My daughter won the first year.
Mutton busting?
Yeah, mutton busting.
I love it.
She rode a sheep for about 6 seconds and made the New York Times.
And how old is she?
At the time, she was 6.
I love it.
Yeah. She aged out. So this year, she couldn't compete. And my son won this year. So people are starting to think it's rigged. It's a huge undertaking, and it's a whole nother set of muscles that I've never used. This year's rodeo, we sold 7,200 tickets. We sold out 2 weeks before the event. There were 30 athletes, large sponsors. We're getting a lot more sponsors from non-Western brands than Western brands. And I think it's because we're able to tell a compelling story, and people can align with the Western world in a inclusive and progressive way, is what our rodeo is. Our fans are over 70% female. I would say close to 90% of them have never been to a rodeo at all. And we just create a space where people can come and dive into the Western world in a safe way.
What percentage of your crowds to this rodeo are white?
I would say about 30.
Okay, that's good too. I wasn't sure. I mean, so they're accepting it. This is an accepted thing, even in the white community.
Yeah, white folks are happy to come. I think it's a place where white people can come and explore this culture and feel comfortable. If you're a white guy and you roll into Okmulgee, you're going to be like one of maybe 100 people there. It is a Black rodeo, through and through, and it's really a deep cultural experience. Our rodeo in Portland, everybody's welcome, and it's very inclusive in a lot of different ways. And so white allies are welcome, and they can come and have a good time. Black folks can come. People that don't want to go out of town to a rural rodeo can come to ours right in the middle of downtown and experience the culture.
I will say that in my experience with that, especially when I was traveling with Thurl Ladding, because he'd go into some of these towns like Kankakee and some of these smaller towns, and he'd roll in, well, I'd say a Black-owned rodeo, but a lot of his audiences would be white. I think it is a little remarkable how divided we are in this country, but my experience has been that white, Black, everybody gets along at the rodeo. And it just seems that everybody's there to witness this spectacular event. And I didn't really feel any sort of negativity when I was photographing and the rodeos that I've been to since. We have a big rodeo that happens here in New Jersey called Cowtown.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right.
It's a
right.
truly true rodeo. It's been going on for decades. And I did a workshop for an art center here, how to photograph a rodeo. So I took some people down there that thought they wanted to photograph a rodeo, but then they got down there and they were a little afraid.
Why? What can go wrong?
I think they got there, they were really committed to photograph the rodeo. But you get down there and, there's Black folks, white folks, Native American folks, Mexicans, everybody's down there. And it's really kind of fun to see that,
Maybe we need more rodeos in this world.
Oh.
Really?
That's
For
what
sure.
I'm getting out of this whole thing.
Yeah. Ivan, I'm curious, can you talk about any impact your work through 8 Seconds has had on the lives of the Cowboys and the rodeo athletes you've met and gotten the money to sponsor?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say because I don't measure it, I don't track it, but there's a kid named Freddie in a little town called Boley in Okmulgee, and I'd taken pictures of Freddie for years, and he got comfortable with me, so I'd actually would like start to get good photos of Freddie. And the first photo I have of him, he's real skeptical. He's sitting on like a tiny pony, and he's just like kind of looking at me like, "Why are you taking my picture?" And then eventually, I got a picture of him, and it's in the book. And he's petting his uncle's horse, and he's drinking a strawberry Shasta, and he's just completely relaxed and in his element. And it's one of my favorite photos that I've taken in this world. It ended up getting sold to a Belgian gallery, and I got a pretty good payday off of it. And I gave some of that money to Freddie, and he called me and thanked me on the phone for the money, told me that he'd been going around telling all of his friends that he's a professional model because he got paid for this picture.
You got the paycheck.
Exactly. And he is. And he took the money that I gave him and he bought himself a horse. He got a Palomino horse. So he has his own horse now. So, that's one of the tangible impacts of being committed to the people in this culture, keeping up with them. We just did a workshop here in Oregon in a little town called Wasco. We did a bull riding workshop. So I had 6 bull riders come out to a little ranch out here, and they got to ride as many bulls as they wanted all day. And the riders were just so appreciative. They were just like, for us to go and practice, we've got to pay $100 to $200 per bull. A lot of times I can only afford to ride one bull, and I have to drive 2 hours each way to get on an animal. And so just getting the practice in, getting the reps in, we probably did like a year of bull riding for each one of these guys in a couple of days. So, giving back and helping people get down the road, helping them level up their skill set is something that I really, really care about. That $60,000 that we gave away in the first rodeo, we saw people go and get their pro card so they could compete in the pro rodeo circuit. One guy won $7,200, and he went and put some of that money toward getting a new trailer so he could haul his horse around.
You're seeing positive, tangible differences that you are making in other people's lives in a subject that you love.
Exactly.
It doesn't get much better than that.
No, It's an absolute thrill, and it's just imbued with purpose. I have to keep reminding myself, like, go take pictures, because I can get so involved in and all of these other components. Like at the bull riding camp this weekend, I had my camera and I took photos while I were there, which the guys were like, "Oh, you got a camera out?" You know, they were like, "What are you doing with that?" Because they only know me as like this rodeo boss. This is where this all starts and ends for me. I have to keep that at the center.
Something I'm kind of curious about, you mentioned that you got together all these bull riders for one day and, you said, and they can ride all they want. Now, from what I'm gathering, it's not a walk in the park to sit on top of a bull for 8 seconds. How many times can one person actually do that in one day before they say, I can't do this again?
The number I came up with is 5. You can do this.
Is it that? I would say maybe 8 to 10, but yeah, because that's not a ride in the countryside.
No, about 5 before your body just quits. And basically everybody got injured in some way.
I would also imagine this is not a sport where athletes have a long time to practice this sport, because this is punishing stuff.
Yeah, it's really rough on your body. I would say a guy is done by the time they're in their early 30s, mid 30s. I think most people's bodies are done.
Oh, man. If I can jump in real quick, one of the videos I'm going to post was this man who, now he's probably in his late 60s, 70s now, but he has had every bone in his body broken, some of them twice, being a bull rider. He's, talking about this back in the 50s and 60s, I guess, when he was riding as a young man in high school rodeo. And you look at these guys now and they're wearing body armor. Back then, the only armor you had was your cowboy hat, and imagine putting yourself in your washing machine and just turning it on high spin. That's what it's like, and do that 2 or 3 times a night. It's crazy. It's a crazy.
You're giving me ideas, This is a little bit dangerous,
Right.
but okay.
It's not for the weak at heart, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd say it's been. I was looking forward to this conversation, watching a few videos and reading articles about you guys beforehand. I just knew, this is going to be fun. This is a different topic, and I'm not disappointed. It's been a wonderful hour and a half already that we're talking, I believe. Ivan, what kind of projects do you have coming up here? And if our listeners want to learn more about you, where can they go? What's cooking in the immediate future for you?
I'm doing this Cowboy project for as long as I can because I love it. I enjoy it, and it's still fun for me. So the 8 Seconds Project, you can Google that and find our Instagram and find the website and connect with us in any way. I'm really good at responding to emails for people that have some connection or interest in this world. There's a lot of stuff that I'm attracted to and interested in. That was just in Chicago. And I really want to make a film about two-step dancing that they do there, stepping. It's a whole culture and people dress up, and it's really exciting and something that I'm interested in. I'm really interested in Black choirs, the choir directors and the pageantry of church, particularly the denomination that I grew up in, the Church of God in Christ.
Oh, right. That's what church I grew up in.
Oh, really? Well, there you go.
Wow.
That explains a lot of it. Yeah. So yeah, I want to do a Kojic project. There's just a lot of things that I want to do, but this Western world is consuming all of my time at the moment. But look for those things in the next few years.
I have little doubt that the pictures and anything you put into it is going to be disappointing. The energy that you bring to it is wonderful, and you truly believe in what you're doing. And all of your websites will be in our show notes for listeners who want to catch up and follow what you're doing. What about yourself, Ron?
One project I'm really excited to learn more about, I got a contact from Don Flemings, who was one of the founders of the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And he has an album out called Black Cowboys. And so I'm looking forward to working on a collaboration with him. I'm going to work with the University of Texas, Austin on collaboration down there in 25. We still need to flesh out the plans for that. Have a traveling show that's going to be traveling around the country. And we already have about 5 or 6 different spots now. It opened up at the Depot Gallery in Oklahoma in September, and it's going to come to Montgomery County College, and then it's going to go to New Jersey. It's going to be at the Hudson River Museum in New York. It's going to debut at Philadelphia at the Print Center, who's also serving as a physical sponsor, in Philadelphia in 2026. We just got all kinds of stuff going on. And a collaboration with my daughter, Riley, who has a business called Brooklyn Weekends. It's on my Instagram account. She does these little creations, and we're going to work on something together. And she's going to send me some sketches where we're going to do the book and one of her creations as a special edition. And then, all the sorts of other things. Yeah. So that's what I have going on with the Cowboy stuff. And then I'm also working on a project with my dad's work. It's actually in Europe right now that's traveling around, called An Overdue Conversation with My Father, where I'm using some of his images to make connections to where we are in society now in terms of racial relations and the environment and all kinds of things like that. So that's happening. And all that stuff's on my website and Instagram.
And the links to those will be, again, in our show notes for our listeners who do want to catch up with your work and continue following you. Ron Tarver and Ivan McClellan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation, fascinating. I've learned more than a few things. Very enjoyable. Just a great, great, great topic. And I wish both of you continued success in getting the word out there and making more people aware of Black Cowboys and the rodeos. It's a great, great topic, and sounds like a ton of fun to watch.
Yeah, thanks. This has been fun. I really enjoyed it. And good talking with you, Ivan. We need to get together.
Yeah, for sure. I've been seeing you since we were in New Mexico. But yeah, thank you all for your time, and happy trails, I guess.
You long little doggy, whatever
that
is. Again, thanks, Ron. Thanks, Ivan. It's been a real pleasure today.
Yeah, it's been great.
Now, if you are a fan of the show but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H Photos YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast Group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Richard Stevens. And on behalf of all of us, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Panasonic for sponsoring this week's episode.